Stephanie White took zero responsibility after the game. Zero. The defense was terrible, and this is supposed to be a defensive-minded coach. So why was Aaliyah Boston bringing the ball up the floor in the fourth quarter like she was the point guard? Nobody understands what this team is trying to do right now. The rotations look confused, the offense looks random, the energy feels off, and honestly, Stephanie White looked completely lost on the sidelines. But while fans were raging online after the Indiana Fever's opening loss to Dallas, Caitlin Clark quietly said something at the post-game podium that should have every executive in the organization paying attention. She didn't complain. She didn't call anyone out. She stayed calm and professional like always. But hidden inside her comments was a message that exposed the biggest problem facing this franchise right now. When reporters asked about her trips to the locker room during the game, Caitlin casually admitted that her back gets out of line pretty quickly. That one sentence changes everything. Because this is no longer about one tough loss to the Dallas Wings. This is about the long-term health of the most important player in the entire league. Clark was visibly uncomfortable during the second half. Cameras caught trainers working on her back. She left the floor multiple times. And afterward, she spoke about it like it was something normal. Like this is already part of her routine. That's the scary part. Not panic, not drama, just acceptance. Meanwhile, Stephanie White stood at the same podium and admitted the coaching staff probably played Caitlin and Kelsey Mitchell too many minutes in the second half. Think about that for a second. Your franchise player is openly saying her back can go out quickly. Your head coach is admitting she overworked her stars. And the bench still cannot produce enough offense to survive without them. That is the real crisis here. Because the Fever are trapped in a brutal situation of their own making. They know Caitlin Clark cannot be running at maximum usage every single night if her back is already becoming an issue this early in the season. But they also know the offense completely falls apart whenever she sits. That's why she keeps getting pushed back onto the floor, and the numbers prove it. Clark finished with 20 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds despite clearly dealing with physical discomfort. Kelsey Mitchell added 30. Aaliyah Boston had 23. The Stars carried the offense. But the bench production? Almost non-existent. Sophie Cunningham scored 3 points in 25 minutes. Lexi Hull finished scoreless. Raven Johnson barely contributed offensively. And the veteran reserve who actually showed scoring ability in preseason wasn't even in uniform. That's not just a bad night, that's a roster construction problem. And fans are starting to realize Caitlin Clark is covering up a lot more issues than people want to admit. Because when Clark talked after the game, she didn't blame the defense, she didn't attack the coaching staff, she simply pointed out that the offense is not the problem and the team has to be more consistent. That sounds harmless on the surface, but read between the lines, the indirect message is obvious. I can't carry this workload forever. This roster has to function without me playing 38 exhausting minutes every night. And right now, it can't. That's why fans are exploding online. Not because of one loss, not because Dallas scored 107 points, but because people are terrified the Fever are burning through Caitlin Clark too early instead of protecting the player the entire franchise depends on. This team was supposed to take a major leap forward under Stephanie White. Instead, opening night raised even more questions. The defense looked disorganized, the rotations made no sense, the bench disappeared, and the franchise superstar was getting treatment on her back during the game. That is not what stability looks like. And now the pressure is officially on everyone in the building. On Stephanie White to fix the rotations, on the front office to improve depth, and on the organization to prove they actually have a long-term plan that protects Caitlin Clark instead of forcing her to survive chaos every single night. The most alarming part about all of this is that Caitlin Clark is still producing historic numbers while clearly not operating at 100%. That is what makes this situation so dangerous for the Indiana Fever. Because when a superstar is dominating while hurt, organizations convince themselves everything is fine. The wins still come, the highlights still go viral, the jersey sales explode, the arenas stay packed. From the outside, it looks manageable, but inside championship organizations, this is exactly the kind of warning sign that keeps executives awake at night. And whether the Fever want to admit it publicly or not, opening night exposed cracks everywhere. The defensive identity Stephanie White promised during training camp completely disappeared the second Dallas started applying pressure. Rotations were late, closeouts were sloppy, transition defense was a disaster, the communication broke down repeatedly, and fans noticed something else immediately. The body language. There were moments during that game where the Fever looked frustrated with each other. Not angry, not divided, but disconnected. Like players were thinking instead of reacting. Like nobody fully trusted what was supposed to happen possession to possession. That is not what elite teams look like. And when things started collapsing late in the game, the decision-making became even stranger. Aaliyah Boston handling the ball deep into the fourth quarter confused everyone watching. Caitlin Clark was moving off the ball while clearly exhausted. The offense lost rhythm. The spacing tightened up. Dallas started dictating the pace completely. Meanwhile, Stephanie White stood on the sideline looking like somebody trying to solve problems in real time instead of somebody controlling the game. That is why fans are so furious right now, because this was supposed to be the season where the Fever looked organized, mature, dangerous. Instead, opening night looked like a team still searching for an identity, and unfortunately for Indiana, the Caitlin Clark era changes everything about how these struggles get judged. This is not a rebuilding franchise hiding in the shadows anymore. Every mistake becomes national conversation. Every rotation gets clipped online. Every injury concern becomes headline news. And every coaching decision is now being analyzed under a microscope because the stakes are enormous. The Fever are not just managing a basketball team anymore. They are managing the biggest financial engine the WNBA has ever seen. That is why Clark's comments hit so differently. When she casually said her back gets out of line pretty quickly, fans immediately connected dots the organization probably hoped people would ignore. People remembered the heating pads during preseason. People remembered the visible discomfort on the bench. People remembered her trips to the locker room. And suddenly, what looked like random soreness started feeling like something much bigger. Now let's be clear about something. Caitlin Clark is tough, probably tougher than people realize. Most players do not continue dropping 20 points and creating offense at an elite level while trainers are actively working on their back between possessions. That takes absurd mental focus. But toughness can become a trap for organizations, because players like Caitlin Clark will keep playing. They will keep competing. They will keep saying they feel fine. And if coaches and executives are not careful, they start believing the superstar can survive anything. That is how long-term problems begin. The scary reality for Indiana is this. Caitlin Clark's value to the franchise is almost impossible to overstate. She is not just their best player, she is their economy. Television ratings explode when she plays. Ticket demand changes instantly when she enters a city. Merchandise sales skyrocket around her. Road arenas sell out because of her. National media coverage revolves around her. She is the centerpiece of the entire modern WNBA business boom, which means protecting her physically should be priority number one. But opening night suggested the Fever still do not have a sustainable system around her, and fans are starting to panic because they see the pattern forming already. Huge minutes, massive offensive responsibility, chaotic rotations, weak bench support, poor perimeter defense, and a star player trying to compensate for all of it. That combination is not sustainable over a long season, especially not with a chronic back issue lurking in the background. The other thing fans are furious about is the complete contradiction coming from Stephanie White. All offseason, Fever fans heard about discipline, defense, structure, communication, smart rotations. Then the season starts, and Dallas hangs over 100 points while Indiana repeatedly loses shooters in transition. That disconnect matters, because when coaches sell a defensive identity, fans expect visible improvement immediately. Instead, the Fever looked unprepared during critical stretches of the game. And Stephanie White's post-game explanation only made fans angrier. Saying the mistakes were correctable did not calm anybody down. Fans do not want to hear about correctable mistakes after watching uncontested threes, blown assignments, and unnecessary fouls all night. They want answers, especially because many of these problems looked identical to issues from last season. And here is where the pressure becomes enormous for Stephanie White specifically. She inherited the most exciting player in basketball. That sounds like a dream situation. But it also means expectations become brutal instantly. Nobody cares about patience anymore. Nobody wants eventual growth. People expect contention now. That is the reality of coaching Caitlin Clark. And fair or unfair, every awkward offensive possession now reflects on the coach. Every substitution gets questioned. Every defensive breakdown becomes a coaching criticism, because fans believe this roster has too much talent to look this disorganized. Now let's talk about the front office because they are not escaping blame either. The Fever made moves designed to create a more balanced roster around Clark. Veterans were added, depth was emphasized, experience was prioritized. But opening night exposed a serious issue. The second unit still cannot consistently relieve pressure from the stars, and that becomes catastrophic when your franchise player is dealing with physical maintenance issues. A good bench does more than score points. It protects stars. It allows coaches to manage workloads responsibly. It stabilizes games when starters rest. Indiana did not have that stability against Dallas, which forced the starters into heavier minutes again, which directly connects back to Clark's health comments. That is why fans are connecting all of this into one giant organizational failure instead of viewing it as separate problems. Because they are connected. The weak bench affects the rotations. The rotations affect Clark's minutes. The heavy minutes affect her body. The physical strain affects late-game execution. And the defensive collapses increase pressure on the offense to compensate. Everything feeds into everything else. And right now, Caitlin Clark is sitting in the middle of all of it. What makes this even more fascinating is how carefully Clark handles these situations publicly. Most young superstars eventually snap at the media. They complain. They show frustration. They start subtly blaming teammates or coaches. Clark does the opposite. She stays composed almost to an unbelievable degree. And ironically, that calmness makes her comments more powerful. Because when Caitlin Clark quietly admits something is wrong, people listen harder. There is no drama clouding the message, no emotional outburst distracting everybody, just facts. And her facts painted a troubling picture after this game. Her back is an ongoing issue. The team still struggles defensively, the stars are carrying too much, and consistency is missing. That is the entire story right there. Now add the fan reaction on top of it, and suddenly this becomes a public relations problem too. Because Fever fans are no longer acting patient. They are acting worried. There is a difference. Angry fans can calm down after wins. Worried fans start questioning the future. And social media after this game looked like full panic mode. Some fans blamed Stephanie White immediately. Others blamed the front office. Some blamed roster construction. Some blamed conditioning. But almost everybody agreed on one thing. The organization cannot afford to mishandle Caitlin Clark physically. Not now, not ever. And honestly, that fear is understandable. Basketball history is filled with franchises that pushed generational players too hard too early, especially players carrying entire leagues or organizations on their shoulders. The pressure to maximize every game becomes overwhelming. Television wants the star playing. Fans want the star playing. Sponsors want the star playing. The league wants the star playing. And eventually, the body starts sending warnings. That is why Clark's wording matters so much. Gets out of line pretty quickly. That does not sound temporary. That sounds managed, maintained, monitored. And those kinds of issues require long-term planning, not short-term survival. The Fever now face a massive challenge. They have to win enough games to satisfy expectations while also protecting the most valuable player in women's basketball from overuse. That balance is incredibly difficult, especially when the roster still depends so heavily on her creation ability. And here is the uncomfortable truth nobody around the organization wants to say publicly. Right now, Caitlin Clark is masking a lot of flaws. Her playmaking hides spacing problems. Her shooting hides offensive stagnation. Her pace hides transition issues. Her star power hides organizational instability. But when she leaves the floor, those weaknesses become visible immediately. Dallas exposed that. The Fever offense became slower and less threatening without Clark initiating everything. The energy shifted. The pressure disappeared. And that is exactly why fans are terrified every time she grabs her back. Because they know how much depends on her. Not just wins and losses. Everything. Now imagine the pressure Clark herself must feel. She knows the expectations. She sees the media coverage. She understands the business side better than people think. And she also knows fans are counting on her every single night to rescue this team whenever things get ugly. That is a massive burden for a second-year player, even one as mentally strong as Caitlin Clark, which is why the organization's response over the next few weeks becomes incredibly important, because opening night alone will not define the season. But how Indiana reacts to these warning signs absolutely could. Do they tighten the rotation logic? Do they reduce unnecessary minutes? Do they prioritize lineup balance over experimentation? Do they hold the coaching staff accountable defensively? Do they develop more reliable bench scoring? Those questions matter now, because the margin for error around Caitlin Clark is much smaller than it used to be, and fans know it. That is why every awkward substitution now sparks outrage online. That is why every visible sign of discomfort creates panic. That is why every post-game quote gets dissected word by word. The Fever are no longer just a basketball team trying to improve. They are the center of the biggest spotlight women's basketball has ever seen. And that spotlight gets hotter every single week. The irony in all of this is that Caitlin Clark herself still sounds incredibly optimistic, even after the loss, even after the physical issues, even after the defensive collapse. She talked about growth, learning, improvement, positivity inside the locker room. That maturity is one of the reasons teammates respect her so much. But fans are starting to wonder how long positivity alone can hold everything together if the structural issues remain the same. Because eventually, talent has to translate into consistency. Eventually, the coaching has to stabilize. Eventually, the defensive identity has to become real. And eventually, the roster has to prove it can support Clark instead of depending entirely on her survival instincts. Otherwise, this pressure is only going to intensify. And make no mistake about it, the pressure is already enormous. Every Fever game now feels like a national event. Every Caitlin Clark update becomes breaking news. Every loss becomes debate television. That is the reality Indiana signed up for when they drafted a transformational superstar. But with that opportunity comes responsibility. And after opening night, a lot of fans are questioning whether this organization is truly prepared for that responsibility yet. Because right now, the talent is obvious. The potential is obvious. Caitlin Clark's greatness is obvious. But structure, stability,